You're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now bring you the Good News Hour with Penny Antill.
Welcome in, everyone, and welcome to the Good News Hour. I'm just delighted to have everyone join us today. Today we are going to be talking again to Sister Anne, who had our program earlier in the month on May 13th, Our Lady of Fatima. And as we pointed out, also Our Lady of the Most Blessed Sacrament. And so Sister Anne was here sharing about her vocation story, as well as all of the blessings and the amazing ways the Lord really drew her and prepared her and graced her, and the information the Lord just kind of poured into her life as she was in Carmel. Now, once in Carmel, Sister, you mentioned during Holy Week, you were in prayer and you felt the Lord drawing you into a special grace. And that was the word that He gave you. If you could maybe pick up your story there and continue with the Marian apparitions that we were talking about and the Mother of God group that you are in you are processing now.
That's correct. And Sister Anne is just in quotes. I'll explain in a minute that I'm temporarily dispensed from my vows as a Carmelite, so I'll be free to start a new congregation, because that's the normal way for the church. Actually, there are thousands of congregations throughout the centuries in the church, and most of them have been started by a religious from one congregation who felt called to do something new, a different charism for the church to benefit it. So it's like the Lord gives you some training in one place so that you can get started. And like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she was a Loreto teaching sister, very happy as a teaching sister for many years. And it was a surprise to her to be called to go and minister to the poorest of the poor. So she had to be completely dispensed from her vows, and she worked in the slums as a layperson for a while until gradually other young women joined her, and then they could start a congregation, and then they get approval, and then she could take vows again as a religious. So that's the process. So sister is in quotes for the moment, but nobody even remembers my secular name, because I've been sister since I was 19, and now I'm 61. So it's been a long time since I was little Mary Kay. So
I'm so glad you explained that, because a lot of times we just don't know how these new orders get started. Like, did someone just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I had a word from the Lord. Here we go." We think of like the Franciscan story, or, with St. Francis, or just St. Ignatius of Loyola, people like that. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, it's always a saga, and it really doesn't it doesn't bear fruit as an active congregation unless a bishop helps to approve that for the first. He has to validate that as a true call or something that the church would benefit from. And like Sister Faustina, she was called to start something, and that was kind of her cross and her mystery. So she herself died without getting it started. Yeah. And sometimes as the years roll on, I wonder, am I going to be a Sister Faustina? We're not going to get this off the ground. But then I always say, no, this order is too important. And Melanie, the one who was the seer, she suffered all her life persecution for the apparition. And so I think she laid the ground for all the crosses. And for me, it's been all consolation, because since ever I've left the cloister, I've just met wonderful, faith-filled people who are listening to Mary's messages and are excited for what she's going to do for the church. And I'm just her instrument. And I always tell people, if it's not going well, talk to Mary about it, because it's her order, and she should have chosen someone younger, smarter, and better looking to promote it.
But I think she chose the right person. And let me just say, I don't think it has to do with our appearance or our age. It has to do with that light of Christ that really.
Well, really, Penny, when you look at history, most congregations were started by more younger and vigorous people in their 40s or so, and they could take on younger candidates and still, have a rapport with 20-year-olds. But when you get to 60 and I take on younger candidates, there's going to be like a grandmother age gap, and but I think that's correct for now, because the church is going something through. Our Lady's been explaining this, that it's the bride of Christ who is finally going to imitate her spouse by going through the Calvary herself. And it's also the book of Revelation. She has now become eligible to be a bride. So she is no longer the young and immature church of the Middle Ages or the adolescent church of recent times, but she is now fully mature, fully ready to become a mother and give birth to many nations. And think of the billions of people who are not Christian in our world. We have to be ready to be married and to bear fruit. And so this is an older church now that's going to be going through this. It's not the young church of the apostolic times, and all those apostles were probably quite young. It's an older, more mature church. So what I see is so many older persons who have been through the charismatic movement for years. They've been following these messages since the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and they keep waiting. But they have grown mature in their faith, and they are ready for what's ahead. And it won't be the the youngest generation won't really understand where all these changes coming from. Why is the church going through this whole Vatican II crisis and now all these trials? It will be the older, mature generation who can take them and steady them and say, listen, there's a long history to this. If we understand it, just trust us and we'll guide you through it, because that it's just too much to learn when you're 20 or 30. You've got to almost live through it. So so there's a time when gray and white hairs give comfort to the younger, because they look on you as someone who's been there and knows what they're doing, and they need some guidance. So I'm proud of my gray hairs. So
that's awesome.
And I see a lot of gray hairs in the pews, and these are people who have been praying their rosaries forever, and they have great faith, and they still have lots of energy. And you don't become pope or cardinal usually till you've had a lot of years under your belt. And John Paul was 58 when he became pope, and he had spent so many years writing books and dealing with university students. He couldn't have done what he did as pope if he had been named pope when he was 40. He had a big job to do. And it's the same Mother Angelica. When did she launch her first satellite? I think she was 58 or 59.
She was in her 50s. Yeah.
So she couldn't have done that without years and years of preparation to be sure of what she was doing. And so I feel like I could not start this order either without years and years of preparation. So I know that I was formed for a long time for this job, that I didn't know I was being formed for it. But when I was called, I felt ready. I feel equipped. So I'm not sure where we got off on that. But okay, back to the locution. So I mentioned that locution the last time. So just briefly go over it. So I was in the cloister 33 years or so, or something like that, and I was praying during Holy Week, and I don't normally have visions and revelations. I'm not a prophet, but that day I understood very strongly that the church would be going through great persecution, and not just Catholics, but all Christians, and that I was supposed to step out of the cloister and accompany these people and help strengthen their faith during these times. And then I heard 6 words, and promote the rule of Mary. And I was kind of shocked. I'm thinking, what is the rule of Mary? I didn't know. And I said, well, and then I heard one more word, La Salette. And that led me on a long saga until, did I go through that last time? I can't remember. I said
you started. We had really touched on it because we were getting close to time. That's why I really wanted to pick up and kind of talk about La Salette. And we had talked a little bit about some of the Marian apparitions before that.
Okay, last time I know we talked. Well, I don't even know if we got into La Salette.
We didn't.
I think we got sidetracked.
We kind of glazed over.
This is what happens to me. I get so excited about one apparition, I go off on a tangent. So So anyway, I knew about La Salette to a degree. So that's where I was going to go, the Lost podcast. And I can take St. Teresa of Avila, in one of her books, she has a digression when she starts to talk about one thing and she comes back to it 13 chapters later. So there's a Carmelite.
That's the Carmelite in you.
Yeah, that's how we get off on things. So, okay. So I knew this much about La Salette, and I'll just go over it briefly because this is where we got off, because I started saying that La Salette was basically the third of the modern Marian apparitions for the world. And so I got to the first, and then I took off. So we talked about Catherine Labouré and the miraculous medal, and then how that ended up an era. We're 1830 now, almost 2030, and this corresponds to the 200 years in the Old Testament prior to the fall of Jerusalem. So so Catherine Labouré, she was a hidden visionary. Nobody really could come up and talk to her. So when Mary appeared at La Salette, this was a huge excitement for the whole Catholic Europe, and because they could come and talk to the two seers. So it was September 19th, which was the eve of the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. In those years, I think it was celebrating the third Sunday or something. Now it's September 15th. But in those days, the first Vespers bell was probably ringing about the time Mary appeared to two shepherds on the mountains in the Alps. And they were hillbilly children. They were very rustic and without much doctrinal instruction. Now, Melanie was a separate case. I don't know if we'll go into her right now, but in a way, they were patron saints, I think, of children who are neglected and abused, and who are used by their parents neglected by their parents, and their catechetical formation is neglected by their parents. And in Melanie's case, they were hired out to make some money from very young age. And so she was left alone on the mountains to take care of cows from the time she was 6. She would, rain or shine, she would be out alone in these places, and her parents would collect the wages. So she was a very special child. And so anyway, and Maximum was a little village boy, the son of the town drunk, and he just spent his time on the streets because his dad didn't earn a living decently, and his stepmother didn't have the money to feed him, so he was out begging and making friends and just spending his time on the streets. But one day, a shepherd, someone who owned cattle, came down to the town and said their shepherd was sick and he needed a replacement for a week. And Maximin's father said, oh, we'll make some money. Okay, Maximin can go up and take care of your cows. And Maximin was 10 years old and terrified of cows and didn't know anything about it. But he followed the man up the mountain. And so he was in charge of a few, I don't know, sheep or cows. It was different depending on the farmer. And so they graze in different areas of the Alps there. And so one of the last days of the week that Maximin was together was a Friday. It turned out that Melanie's master had set her pasture that day next to the plot that Maximum was. And as soon as Maximum saw a young girl over there, she was about 14, but she looked much younger because she was really, really pretty neglected. And so he wanted to come over and play, and he was so talkative. I mean, he was a town antique, and she didn't know how to socialize, and so she didn't know how to get along with him at all. But he just kept following her around. But by the end of the day, they were friends, and so they agreed that they would do their best to shepherd, next door to each other the next day, which would be Saturday, his last day on the mountain. And so in the morning, they were playing together, and she didn't really know any games. She said, the only game I know is Paradise. He said, well, what's that? And so she collected a bunch of pretty rocks, and that was the first layer. That was Earth. And then she went and collected all the wildflowers she could find and made a layer of beautiful flowers, and that was heaven. That was Paradise. And then, so they did that and entertained themselves all morning. And then they sat down to admire their Paradise, and then they had lunch, and then they said it wasn't usual for them, but they fell asleep. They took a little nap. And so when they woke up, there was a beautiful lady sitting on their Paradise, but kind of hovering above it. and she had her head in her hands, and she was weeping. And so this was Our Lady of La Salette. La Salette wasn't a village. It was kind of the pasture area that was common ground. And so there she was, and they approached her and find out why she was crying. And so then she began to speak in their dialect, which was, they're very close to the Alpine Italian border. So actually their little dialect was closer to Italian than French. And so she spoke to them in their language and talked to them. She was crying because the people today were not going to Mass on Sunday, and they were using the name of her son in vain. They were cursing, and she was crying because God was going to have to punish them because they're Catholic and they shouldn't be doing this. And so they were listening and listening, and then she stood up and began to speak to them individually. So she spoke to Maximin in French, which he didn't quite understand, and Melanie couldn't hear what she said. And then she began to speak a long time to Melanie in French, and Maximin couldn't hear that. And so he actually got bored and went off to play with his dog or something for a little while when she was talking so long with Melanie. And then she called them both back and kind of reaffirmed the original message about the keeping holy the Sabbath day, and the second commandment, keeping holy the Lord's name. And so she goes, now you will make this known to all the people. And then she ascended into heaven. And so Maximin just, wanted to tell the whole world about this, and Melanie's kind of shy, but they brought their cows back home, and so Maximin blew the news immediately, just like Jacinta did at Fatima, and messed up everything. So then Melanie had to tell the story. And these two children, they were well known, even though Melanie was so isolated. They were well known because they were hired by different people, and they were well known as being trustworthy and honest. And Maximin never stole anything, even though he could have been a pickpocket, being a poor kid. And so they both had a very good reputation for being honest. And they also, everybody knew they didn't know that much. They didn't have that much religious instruction to be making up things about from heaven. And so they were believed immediately. And so the owner sent them down to the rectory to talk to the priest. And so he believed immediately. And it was Saturday. By now it was Saturday evening. So he made that. No, by the time they got there, they went there Sunday morning, the next morning. And he was on his way to celebrate the parish mass. And he actually preached about it from the pulpit immediately. And it was just a huge sensation. There were just so many conversions, because for them, even though it was a threatening message, it was so kind of Mary to warn them and to be weeping over them and to want them to convert and not to be punished. And so they were just so touched that Our Lady came down to heaven to tell them about that. And there were major conversions, and actually Our Lady of La Salette, she's known as Our Lady Reconciler, because there were so many conversions to reconcile people to the world. And this became a sensation all through Europe, because this was really the first major Marian apparition with a message for the world, because she said, make this known to all the people. Now that day, both children mentioned that they had received a secret that they couldn't make known right away, and neither of them knew the other. And so they weren't pretending they didn't receive a secret. That was clear, but they just said that part of the message they couldn't make known right away. But what they did make known was sensational. And they happened to have one of the holiest bishops in France. He was a great hero of the French Revolution. Now he was pushing 90, so this was a long time ago. When he was a young priest, he actually risked his life to stand near the processions to the guillotine, and he would give absolution to one cart after another on their way to be martyred. And so he was a great hero, and he was celebrating Mass and he did not take the oath, and so he risked his life many times, and he wasn't one of the aristocracy, and so he was a very special man. Mary really chose him to be the recipient of this in his diocese. But he didn't have okay, what do we do for a major public apparition? This was new in Church's territory. We didn't. Private revelation was private, but this was a message for the public. So this kind of was a boundary, something kind of passing over a boundary here, so he didn't quite know what to do. So he got some advice from Pius IX, who's now Blessed Pius IX and extremely devoted to Mary. And so he set up a diocesan inquiry, and that went on for 5 years, getting testimonies of witnesses, the opinions of theologians, and all they could do to verify this as much as possible. And in time, I won't go into it, but they actually, the children wrote down their secrets and sent them to the Pope. And it was clear that Pius IX did not, he respected the authority of a bishop for his territory, because that's the tradition of the church. The bishop of the territory where a private revelation takes place, he is the king. He is the one to decide whether that is something that would benefit his people, whether that was good, and whether these people that he investigated himself on the ground, whether that was to be recognized as something worthy of credence, or whether he should warn the people that this is probably a false revelation, probably stay away from that. So actually the funny thing is, and people don't realize that doesn't become dogma. Whatever the bishop decides, that's nice when he approves it, but the next bishop can disapprove, and the bishop after that can reapprove. It never becomes dogma. It's always something on the authority of the bishop of that place. Now, the only time it becomes moved to a Vatican place is if the bishop himself is not doing a proper, unbiased investigation. And that's where you get something like Medjugorje, where there are problems with the way the bishop was handling it. And we think he was probably under a lot of pressure with the communists, because Medjugorje was a communist country for a long time. And so who knows what pressures that bishop was under. So eventually Medjugorje is under a Vatican investigation, but that's not normal. Even Lourdes and Fatima, these things are now parts of the liturgy. They have canonized saints. Still, those are approved by the diocese. They're not Vatican approved. The Pope, they're not papal apparitions. So it never becomes a level of dogma, because if a saint or Mary or an angel appears, it's always a way of encouragement. It's from a work of the Holy Spirit, because prophecy is not about delivering the word. That belongs to the Son of God. It belongs to upholding and encouraging and help us to fulfill the word in our time, in our circumstances. And so that's what Mary is doing now. So the next bishop, that bishop retired early because he was already 90-something. So he approved it formally in 1851, just 5 years after the apparition. He approved everything, even though the secrets were not public. And then the next several bishops were all from the aristocracy, who were all Freemasons. And this was a great plague in church, in the French church in the 1800s. And so they didn't have much faith, and they didn't like the fact that Melanie was in so held in such high esteem, and that pilgrims were gathering around her, and she was trying to enter the local community of sisters there, and the next bishop just would not have any of it. So he convinced some other prelates that she was in danger of her head turning from all the attention, and that he wanted to preserve her innocence and keep her simple and humble. So he had her basically kicked out of his diocese and carted off to England, and basically put into a Carmelite cloistered monastery in England. And she was just learning French. She didn't know English, so this was really isolating her. And but she was famous already, so the Carmelites were thrilled to have a visionary, among them. And so she was welcomed, but she couldn't become a choir sister because learning Latin was beyond her. And so they kept her as a lay sister, and she lived a very extraordinary life for the next 7 years. We're getting more and more things coming out. We're trying to translate a lot that's in French into English so we can learn more about Melanie's life. But after 12 years from La Salette, she was 7 years in Carmel, I believe, and she told the superiors, "I have to leave now and make known the secret." And they said, "What? You have vows of enclosure?" She said, "No, I just took that poverty, chastity, and obedience. I didn't take that enclosure thing." And so they didn't understand that. They thought that would be a scandal. So finally, in frustration, she wrote a letter to a bishop, tied it to a rock, and threw it over the wall. And someone on the streets picked it up and took her to the bishop.
Oh my gosh.
And the bishop came to the parlor and met with her, and she said, no, this young lady is in her rights. She has a duty to fulfill. And so he gave her access to, gave her permission to leave the enclosure. Now, so she would spend the rest of her life trying to get this message published. But wherever it was made known, it starts out very strong to the priests, cesspools of sin, and religious convents, dwellings of demons. And so Mary was really pointing out sins of hypocrisy and lack of faith, and that were very serious in the eyes of God, which the lay people were they were kind of clued in that these priests were not that fervent, but it was exposing some hidden sins in a way. And you can imagine, well, the French priests didn't really like to hear this. And so they did not welcome Melanie. They excommunicated her from every single diocese in France. And so eventually she was kind of picked up and adopted by an Italian bishop who was close to Leo the 13th. And with some more years, it took that he was able to get an imprimatur and publish that secret that had so harsh. And not only does it begin very harshly against the sins of the clergy and religious, it also talks about the political leaders. I mean, most of Catholic Europe was Catholic kings, and they were responsible for not leading the world in a paragon of virtue. And then it gets into very symbolic apocalyptic language. So, and I've never figured it all out because, it's you have to decode it. But we know that Mary was actually talking about the Antichrist and different things that would be very, very disrupting. But, the lay people, when that was published in French and Italian and started spreading throughout Europe and different lay publications, like Catholic papers would pick it up and publish it, whether or not the bishops were approving it or it was welcomed by the priests and the bishops. The lay people, many of them were very attuned to the lack of faith and the political ambitions of some of these bishops, and they were listening to Our Lady, and they were saying, what times we live in, and we got to keep our eyes open.
It's true, and all of these incredible as you said, secrets, but messages for the world. I mean, having been thrust onto the public's eye like that had to be just a tremendous hardship for her, being such a simple young person, and even trying to grow in virtue, trying to grow with the vocation, and still always having these struggles, these sufferings like that. But I know that today it's being rediscovered. Sister, tell us a little bit about your journey with what you have found and where the Lord is calling you today.
Well, when I heard that locution in the little oratory in Carmel years ago, I knew when he said La Salette, I knew La Salette was like a two-part thing. A part of it was very clear what Mary was saying, and the other part was very apocalyptic language that I didn't quite understand. And so, I loved Mary's messages, but I hadn't meditated extremely long on the apocalyptic part because I was just not getting any insights. I was getting tons of insights through Father Gobi, what he said about the apocalypse, but I hadn't spent that much time with La Salette, so I hadn't noticed that in the middle, or actually toward the end of the secret, Mary says to Melanie, "And I am giving you a rule for a new religious order for the latter times." But see, that's not published in any booklets that are in English. And so I guess that just wasn't on my radar. I forgot. So I had to go reread the books we had in the library on La Salette. And then I found that one line. There is a rule she gave for religious order. But then I'm thinking, okay, it could be just totally in code. It could just be part of the apocalyptic thing. And it might not be for a real religious order. It could be, who knows what it's all about. And worst of all, it's probably in French. And I don't know any French. And so where am I going to get it? I'm in the cloister. And how can I vet this locution that I heard? Is it a joke from Satan trying to get me distracted or trying to get me wanting to leave the cloister? Or is it something that I need to really follow? And how do I get that? And so at this time, because I had computer skills, I think I mentioned that last time, that I I was the only person who had a computer in the monastery, but we did not have it connected to internet, and I knew nothing about the internet. So, but I did know that sometimes when we were doing things, we need to get information from different things from the internet. So I had permission to give a flash drive to the patern sister with a note to some benedictor who was coming by, and ask them, could they look this up and bring me back the digital file? And so I thought, okay, I don't want to even mention to anybody in the cloister that I'm thinking about leaving, because if you know what it is to live in a closed place with a bunch of women, that can be very distressing. And each one says, don't tell the other, but I just want to tell you this. So pretty soon they all know, and I didn't want to get anybody disturbed that I was thinking about leaving, because I wasn't sure I was thinking about leaving. I wanted to really vet this carefully. So I didn't even tell my confessor or my priors, nobody. It was lip sealed until I saw this text. And so in the meantime, I prayed and I meditated more on La Salette and Mary's other apparitions. But so I wrote a little note. Is kind of devious. But I had permission because we were working on the Carmelite rite, and I was always doing things with the monks, and the nuns paid no attention to what I was doing, and so they didn't really know what I was doing. So I just wrote, it would be nice for the rite if we could compare the Carmelite rule, which we follow St. Albert, to the rule of St. Augustine and the rule of Mary. We had these in digital format. It'd be easier to copy these and search them. And so I wrote that in a little a little note and put it with the flash drive. And some weeks later, I got a flash drive back with the rule of St. Augustine on it in digital format, and the rule of St. Albert, and no rule of Mary. I thought, struck out. So I thought, okay, I'll try again. And there are actually 6 major rules in the Catholic Church that have been approved. And even though there are thousands of congregations, almost all of them are under the umbrella of these major charisms. So you've got the rule of St. Albert, Basil, Benedict, Augustine, Francis, and Ignatius. I might be skipping somebody, I don't know who, but Ignatius was the last one. He came in the 1500s at a new time. Each of these actually appeared at an era when the church was going through some new crisis. So like if you look at Benedict, Rome had just fallen. So now it was up to somehow the church was supposed to take a leadership role in Europe and evangelize all these pagan countries up in Northern Europe. And it was the Benedictines who drained swamps and taught people to farm and brought libraries and really instructed people in a deep Christian faith to stabilize all of Europe. So they had a wonderful charism, and that rule of Benedict brought so much richness to the faith. And then some centuries later, they were starting to get corrupt, and it was all about money and fighting each other's kingdom and trying to get land. And so Francis was risen up. The Lord brought him with the rule of poverty, and that took so many lay people by storm. There was a great Third Order Franciscans. There were great movements. And then a few centuries later, the church was discovering, oh my goodness, there's all these unevangelized peoples in different continents. And also the church was falling apart because of Protestantism. And so the Lord raised up St. Ignatius with a different charism that was not so hinged on the liturgy and the monastery, but more of a missionary order. And so he had to go. All the bishops said, I don't think you fit under any of the rulers, under these umbrellas. You better go to the Pope and talk about this. And so the Pope approved his rule. And so we have, I don't know how many hundreds of missionary congregations since then who are under the rule of St. Ignatius. But, you just think of the Jesuits, but like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she follows the Ignatian rule. St. Faustina's community follows the Ignatian rule. So when Mary brought a new rule, that's the 7th rule, and Melanie said this will have many new congregations under it. And so as a religious, I knew the significance of a rule. I mean, it's not like I was called to go out and promote one little new congregation somewhere. This was starting a rule, starting an order, starting something major for the church. And of course, we are in crisis times, and this is a wonderful time that we do need something new for the church. And so when I saw that, I thought, but I don't know. Is this a real rule? This was I got to find out. I got to see this rule, And so the next month I said, okay. So I found I put another note on the turn for some other benefactor. I said, okay, can we see the rule of St. Ignatius and the rule of St. Albert and the rule of Mary? And they brought back, the other 2, but not the rule of Mary. month by month, this went on. I didn't get the Rule of Mary. So it's kind of discouraging. I mean, what else am I going to do? I mean, I got to see this thing. And so we were now a whole year around. We were back in Lent.
My.
We were back in Lent, and I had exhausted everybody I knew. I didn't have any more questions to ask. I didn't know who else, I could get by asking this. And so I was at the end of my tether. And so now, St. Teresa of Avila, I don't know if you know, she was the one who had a great devotion to St. Joseph. He did many favors for her, and most of her Carmelite monasteries that she founded were dedicated to St. Joseph. So she was the one, through her writings, that really made St. Joseph the great patron of modern Catholicism. He wasn't that well known in the early centuries. And so in Carmel, the feast of St. Joseph is like Christmas. It's a huge feast. And so we were about to start his novena, and so I'm thinking, St. Joseph, okay, this would be the order of Mary. Surely he would be the protector. He would have an interest in this. So I said, St. Joseph, I'm going to make a novena to you, and please help me, because if this was a deception by Satan and I'm not supposed to leave the cloister, I'm not supposed to be thinking about this, please make it known to me and I'll just drop it. But if I'm supposed to start this thing, then please get me that rule. So I made the novena, and the eve of the novena, like Christmas Eve, we're already starting to celebrate St. Joseph a little, but it happened to be Laetare Sunday that day. And the monks next door, they weren't Tridentine right, but they did a lot of Latin in the liturgy. And so Gregorian chants, gorgeous, gorgeous liturgy. It was just so beautiful. And I was coming out of the Mass. I'm about to take off my choir mantle and fold it up. And I was just so on high. It was such a beautiful Mass. And there on my choir box was the Rule of Mary printed out in 3 languages, and a flash drive with the Rule of Mary with 6 languages, and a little Post-it note that said, "Oh, sister, we found this months ago and forgot to bring it to you."
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, St. Joseph.
That's what I said. Okay. I said, St. Joseph, I got it. So,
that is like a little Christmas, you know how kids always want to open a gift on Christmas Eve? That is like a gift.
It was so obviously him. So I ran upstairs, knelt down, and read this rule. And there's nothing symbolic or apocalyptic about it. It was a very beautiful rule. And one of the main charisms is that it would preach the last things, so that people who are getting heaven, hell, judgment, and purgatory, that this order was there to remind people of their eternal life, and that we have this short life to really strive for sanctity. And of course, it would be devoted to Mary's messages and getting her messages known, and promoting the Mother of God, which none of the other rules do. Of course, the Dominicans have the Rosary and the Carmelites have the Scapular, but the rules they follow don't really mention Mary. So this is a novel rule. This is really right from Mary. And in the rule,
that to me is incredible. Right there is that, of course, growing up, I've heard of La Salette. We have little chapels down here dedicated to Our Lady of La Salette, but I never heard of this. So this is very new, and this is what the Lord was calling you out to bring forth. And that's where you are today, huh?
And what struck me, and it was kind of divine providence that I had to go, this surreptitious way, because I began studying the other rules of the other congregations, which I never paid attention to, because I was a Carmelite. So what did I care about Benedict or Ignatius? It wasn't my business. Yeah. So suddenly I was becoming cognizant of all these other charisms, and I could see that none of them mentioned lay people in the rule. But this rule of Mary, she mentions lay people in the rule. Now, third orders, oblates have developed from the centuries, and that's because lay people are inspired, and they feel inspired by some of these charisms, and so they attach themselves to some of these these orders, these rules. But But this is the only one that mentions lay people in the rule. And to me, it was just like, wow, Vatican II, because Lumen Gentium was the primary dogmatic doctrine, or the document of the Second Vatican Council. And what was in there was a very strong statement that had settled centuries, you wouldn't believe, centuries of debates among theologians, even saints, whether lay people, the unconsecrated, those not religious or priests, whether they were called to the life of perfection and the high sanctity. And Vatican II settled that dogmatically, that said every baptized person in the church, in the mystical body, is called to the heights of sanctity, and that they need to understand their vocation. And the lay people, that was such a key thing throughout Vatican II, was so much for the laity to understand their mission in the world. And it couldn't come a lot earlier, because 100 years ago, how many lay people, it took all day to eke out a living from the land, to weave your cloth, to bake your bread, they were spending all their time raising children for the church and getting them catechized, but they weren't really feeling called to go out and evangelize. They were trusting the priests and the sisters to do that. But now they were like, oh my goodness, the lay people are so well educated, and they're out in the highest levels of all sorts of businesses, and they are in the world rubbing shoulders with people who are not Christian, and they are witnessing to their faith everywhere. And that was the mission of Vatican II, was especially for the laity to understand their vocation is so important in the church. And when I saw that in this order, I saw that bearing witness to the eternal life, to last things, that is Mary's like saying in this rule that this rule cannot fulfill its mission just with the religious priests, brothers, and sisters. This rule is dependent on a lot of lay people consecrated to her, not necessarily taking vows or anything, not even being a formal third order, but she depends on them to do their duty in the church, and she cannot bring in her triumph without the laity. And I just thought that was so beautiful. I just made my heart dance for joy.
It is. It really is.
And for 9 years, I was appointed to turn sister. So I actually was the one who dealt with the lay people who came to the Carmel to ask for prayers or to bring a donation of vegetables or whatever. And so I had become very astute to how they were living their faith. And I was in a Carmel in Minnesota at a time when he's now debunked, this archbishop, but he advocated that the Catholic schools needed to have equal opportunity and to hire open homosexuals as teachers. And this caused a mass exodus of lay people with their children to try to homeschool, because Minnesota is a very liberal state, so they were getting a lot of that already in public education. And so many lay people were coming to me in tears asking prayers that they could take this on, because they didn't all feel qualified to teach at home. And some of them had very small children, and you're trying to handle one child in a classroom and change diapers with the other.
Yeah.
I just saw the heroism and the dedication and the firmness. I was just so in awe of the laity in our time. Excuse me.
And so, what we mentioned in the first program was about how important it is, and how that even happened in my own life, that, I was raised Catholic, but thought all the saints were already made, because the statues and the prayer cards. No one ever told me I was called or could be a saint. And it wasn't until much later in adulthood that realization just really hit me and changed everything. And like you, I had read Saint Teresa of Lisieux and her story, and I was so moved by it, because that was the name I chose for my confirmation. In fact, all the women in my family, Saint Teresa of Lisieux is our confirmation name. And
that is so beautiful.
It's just one of those things. And so we've all been just very devoted to her and her novena and her prayers. And of course, we all have roses growing in our yards. But, that brings up the one other thing that I mentioned to you, that here in South Louisiana for many years now, and we pray it on Radio Maria, we pray the sixth glorious mystery, the triumph of the Blessed Mother and the coming of her Son, Jesus, as our King. And before we close our program, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how people can find out more about where the Lord is calling you with this movement and La Salette, and how people can find out more about and watch your videos.
All right. I just get so often. I could talk for hours. I'm sorry if I don't do this whole thing faster because I get so caught up in one area.
Well, there's so much to say, sister. And that's why it's so important that we share because you have developed, technologically, you have developed a lot of information.
So I got, with the encouragement of my priors, once she heard that story, everybody believed, my sisters believed, my archbishop believed. So I got all the proper dispensations from religious life so that I could be free of those obligations to that particular order. That's how the church does it. They kind of unhook you from one place so you can make vows in a new congregation. But of course, I can't make vows until I get that established. And one reason I can't write constitutions yet for the new order to approach a bishop is because there is so much documentation for La Salette. So I need helpers to translate some of the many things from La Salette. And so I'm always looking for anyone who knows a little French to translate a few pages or a chapter or something. Get hold of me, please. But so right now, technically, I'm a lay person, and I've been living in other people's houses because my spiritual director says, you got to work full time for Mary, and you got to get a YouTube channel and a website. And so I built this big website just to put up all of Mary's messages that I can. And English is really the new Latin. Half of my YouTube followers, that's Marian News YouTube channel, half of them are outside the United States because so many people study English as a second language. So it is accessible to many people in the world. And then with the help of a volunteer, I built a massive, it's kind of a box. It's a house that still has lots of rooms to be filled, but it's a House of Mary, OMD. That's Ordo Matris Dei, which would be the initials once we get a religious order started, .org, House of Mary, OMD.org. And there I put up, I need to put up, I don't have everything on my YouTube channel into the House of Mary, but I got things in the House of Mary that aren't on YouTube. So it's kind of a back and forth thing that we're trying to get uploaded. But so I have major series, like one on the Apocalypse, what Mary has said about our living through the book of Revelation. And then I have one which I just keep doing hour talks on what Mary has said at different apparition sites. And then I have one on what it means to be consecrated to a woman. Like, why are we consecrating ourselves to a human being? Why are we doing this? And so I explored that theologically to help you understand the importance of becoming consecrated to Mary. I don't care the formulas to Montfort or others, but to belong to Mary is so important. And so I'm still living in other people's houses, and I've come down to, I've been in Wichita for a long time. I have many lay people there and a lot of lay Theotokens. Dominicans call themselves after Dominic, Francis after Franciscans, or vice versa. So the lay people in my prayer group said, what are we going to call ourselves from the order of the Mother of God? What do we do? And they said, I know in Greek, that dogma was Theotokos. So we're going to be Theotokens. And I said, do you think anybody can spell that? Are you sure you want that word? And they said, absolutely, that's who we are. We're Theotokens. So we have, so there are things on the website about how to become a lay Theotoken. And many of them are already Carmelites or lay Carmelites or Franciscans. It's not in competition with any other. You can be a Theotoken and a third order something else, because this is not, it's just your only status is that you have made your consecration to Mary, which really doesn't affect anybody's other vows or obligations to third order, but you're just giving yourself to Mary to help promote her messages in the way Mary inspires you. And this website offers a lot of material that you can pass on to someone else. Hey, check out this link or check out this PDF file, which has her text. So is that where you want me to go, Penny?
Yes. I love it. And I love how your website really is like a house with all the little rooms and all the little doors. I know I mentioned this in the first part, but that got my attention. Wow. I just couldn't wait to find out what was in the next room. What else is in that House of Mary? It was great. And we love having you in Louisiana. I hope that in some way, this can become your new home. I don't know what the Lord has, but I really enjoyed listening to your YouTubes, and people have shared them with me, and I've shared them with others. So it's all about spreading the word, and how can we help other people? Today it's all about sharing online, social media and everything. But if you're going to share something worth sharing. Share something where it's great to watch the silly cat video and all the other good stuff that they have out there, but they have a lot of other things. And what you have done is you've created an oasis on the internet. So thank you for that, sister. And thank you for being on Radio Maria on the Good News Hour and sharing your story. Thank you for sharing the message of La Salette. I hope that for some of our listeners, this is not the first time you've heard it. But if it is, go check it out. Check out houseofmaryomd.org and find out more about what Our Lady is saying about these, our last times. Sister, is there anything you would like to say before we wrap up?
Well, Mary has been talking about chastisements that are coming, and that's in the Bible. Jesus talked about it. And we know that this is a dramatic time that we're living in. So we might see very serious hardships. We might see the dollar drop, or we might see plagues like coronavirus or whatever. And so we might be going through difficult times, but that's why we need to know, to keep in our minds the things Mary had said, because her messages, not only did they predict things, well, if you don't repent, this chastisement is going to happen, but she also says, in the end, my immaculate heart is going to triumph. And she says that in so many different ways. And so it's like Bible verses. You've got to hold on to them during hard times. And so these are very comforting messages that you need yourself and that you need to have in your back pocket to pass on to someone else going through a hard time.
Well, praise the Lord that He has used you to bring this message to us and to share with us during a time when we have been focused on what's the next video we can watch, or what website can we get into today. Sister Ann, thank you so much for sharing on the Good News Hour. This is Penny Antill with Radio Maria. And once again, I want to thank all of our family for listening and tuning in today. Share this program with someone that you love. Spread this message. And as always, we will continue to pray for you. Keep praying for us. Bye-bye now.